Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So today's video is going to be a sort of follow-up to my previous video where I discussed the phenomenon that I labeled as the disappearing case of the streaming shows. In that video, I discussed a new trend that we've been seeing amongst Hollywood studios where they get rid of their own original streaming shows from their streaming platforms. Yeah, like I said in that video, it seems really counterintuitive. It seems like it doesn't quite make sense until of course you look at the finance side of things, until of course you look at the dodgy Hollywood accounting and you realize it makes perfect sense after all. So if that sounds interesting to you guys and you haven't checked out that video already, you can do so. It's up on my channel. But today we're going to be touching on a tiny point that I discussed in that video, which is how this trend affects the creatives in Hollywood. And as I mentioned in that video, one of the major effects that we are seeing from this trend, as well as the overall move towards streaming that Hollywood has been experiencing in the last 10 years, is that now the writers are striking. Okay, Hollywood is on strike, and we may be seeing this become a trend in the industry as well in the next coming months, with perhaps even the actors joining in on the action. So in this video, I'm going to be diving into why it is that the WGA decided to strike and what their demands are, and I'm going to be giving you guys my thoughts on this very interesting and worrying issue. So if that sounds good to you guys, then keep on watching. Be sure to give this video a like if you enjoy this kind of content from me, and as per usual, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. And now without further ado guys, let's get into this writer's strike. First of all, the WGA organized this strike. The WGA is the Writers Guild of America, and it's a union that represents about 11,500 writers working in Hollywood. So this covers writers that work on films, TV shows, and other forms of content coming out of the industry. Now, this was a really big deal when it happened because this was the first writers' strike and the first strike that we've seen in Hollywood in 15 years since the previous strike, which took place in 2008, which was in large part a result of the financial crash that was felt throughout the world. Okay, that was painfully felt throughout the world when we were all in this horrible economic depression, and funnily enough, we may be experiencing the exact same economic conditions, which largely explains why the writer's strike is taking place right now. Now, perhaps those of you in the US can't relate to this, but as a UK citizen, okay, as a resident of Britain, the word strike has been in the headlines for the past couple of years constantly, literally constantly. We have seen lots of public bodies go on strike, like I said, because of the dire economic circumstances that many countries are in right now post-pandemic. And so it's not surprising to me that you know, any union would decide to go on strike at this point because the economic situation is a global issue. But we're going to be diving into why the writers specifically decided to go on strike on this occasion. I was surprised to see that writers in Hollywood were striking, because to me, you know, a Hollywood job is just so glamorous. I assume that it's, you know, highly paid, you have all of these privileges. Like, if you're working in Hollywood, you've made it, right? Right, wrong. Because apparently it's only the very tippity top in the industry that actually live that way. They actually have, you know, the glamorous lifestyles that we tend to see in trades and in social media and that. But in reality, the vast majority of people working in this industry just work, you know, regular paying jobs. They don't have glamorous lifestyles. They have mortgages and, you know, kids and families to take care of. But traditionally speaking, writing jobs used to be a pretty secure source of income. It used to be a pretty, you know, reliable, regular job that you can have in the industry. But that all changed in the age of streaming. Hollywood's focus on streaming and the creation of these new business models that are centered around streaming has really affected the way that creatives and particularly writers are compensated for their work in so many different ways, which is surprising because we often hear about how studios are pumping in billions upon billions of dollars to try and satiate this ravenous animal that is a streaming platform. Okay, because it's in constant need of new content and studios just have to keep on pumping this new content into it, and so there must be a bunch of money available in order to do this, right? Well, it turns out that these writers are getting the short end of the stick consistently. So even though we're seeing a 39% increase in revenue amongst the studios, as was reported by the WGA, we've actually seen a decrease in salary amongst writers by about 4% in this same period of time. This is a result of several things. First of all, the streaming model has sort of done away with the traditional TV model, which used to be very profitable for writers. With traditional TV shows that used to air on networks, you used to have like 22 to 24 episode seasons, and writers would be paid, per episode that they wrote on, and so it became very lucrative for them to be on shows like this, like The Big Bang Theory or Friends. And not to mention, these shows oftentimes went on for loads and loads of seasons. We're talking 5+ seasons at the very least. So again, this was a very well paid, stable job that writers could rely on, and it was very sought after within the industry. Like I said, with this age of streaming, shows like this have become less and less popular. We still get the occasional one, like Abbott Elementary, for instance. Its second season was 22 episodes long, but even by Quinta Brunson's admission, shows like this are very few and far between these days in the age of streaming. And so oftentimes we have a bunch of shows that only have about 6 to 12 episodes a season, and then when it comes to the number of seasons, that's a whole other discussion, because Netflix has set a precedent for streaming shows basically only having around about 4 seasons in total. And so this has led to there being a huge pay cut for writers. As you can imagine, you've gone from expecting TV shows to have 22 to 24 episodes per season to only having 6 to 12. Like, that is a huge pay cut. And not to mention, like I said, you have fewer seasons in total. And this has also led to syndication being a thing of the past as well, and syndication was this stage or this milestone that a show would reach when it had 100 episodes or around about 5 seasons, and that meant that the show was officially in syndication on a network. It would have reruns, and the creatives behind the scenes and also the actors would get some residual money from syndication. So that was another form of income for these writers that has now been lost largely because of the new streaming model, where fewer episodes are needed per season. As if that wasn't bad enough, going back to my previous video talking about this trend that we're seeing with studios getting rid of their own original programming from their streaming platforms. Spoilers for that video. But on top of everything, now we have studios going out of their way, getting rid of content that's not doing as well on their platform in order to no longer have to pay residuals to the creatives, including the writers. Now we have this combined effect of writers having fewer episodes to work on because streaming shows tend to be shorter. They have fewer seasons to work on as well because streaming shows tend to have fewer seasons in general. And not to mention, they're not able to advocate for a pay rise sufficiently because there are no numbers released on actual viewership behind the scenes, which makes it hard for them to advocate for pay increases as the seasons go on. And then on top of that, you've lost the possibility of syndication, which used to be very lucrative as a back-end deal for writers and creatives. And now, to make matters worse, studios are getting rid of content from their platform to ensure that they no longer have to pay residuals to those creatives either. But then it gets worse. Okay, it gets even worse than this, because it turns out that studios have found a way to cut back the expenditure for writing teams, okay, by introducing these mini rooms. They've introduced mini rooms, okay, which allows them to hire fewer writers to work on their shows. And so now you have writers that are getting paid less money to do more work because now these teams are smaller than ever before. So yeah, as you can see, you know, the combination of all of these issues, you know, these problems that have been exacerbated in the streaming market has led to some writers being in very insecure financial circumstances. Again, because they're only paid per episode that they write on. This is not a, you know, salaried position where you get a certain amount every year regardless of what you do. It really does depend on what you are able to produce, the scripts you are able to produce and what you're able to write on throughout the year. And so it's just short of being a gig job, like a 0-hour job basically. And it's been made much worse by these studios trying to cut corners where they can, and these streaming services having fewer episodes for these writers to work on. Now you might think like, oh, well, if writers have fewer episodes to work on per year, then why don't they just hop and jump to other shows? Perhaps instead of just working on one, you know, traditional TV network show, they can work on 2 or 3 streaming shows to make up for that deficit. In theory, that would be a good idea, but that's not really how it works. Because if you are working on one streaming show, I mean, anything could happen throughout the upcoming months that would disrupt your ability to work on anything else. It may need some rewrites on set, okay? The showrunner may decide to go in a different direction. You know, all these changes may need to happen, and you need to be there. You need to be available for that series. Otherwise, your job is essentially not done and you may not get paid. And so you can't move on to something else before then. And on top of that, I mean, just like finding any job, it's going to take ages for you to get that something else to begin with, and that's months spent not working on anything and not gaining any income. And it's especially really hard for creatives in Hollywood to get that kind of, you know, constant reliable work, because you're going to be judged off of your previous project, and if you don't have many projects to your name yet, then it's going to be really hard for you to get a new project before you run out of money for your rent, you know. Like it's a really difficult situation. Like you might be like, oh my goodness, I'm a writer on this latest Netflix series called Squid Game, and it's going to be the next big hit, but it's only coming out in 2025. And so what do I have to show for my talent? You know, what do I have to show for my worth so that I can get another gig for this year so that I can pay my mortgage? Like, it's a really difficult situation to be in, I can imagine. Another huge problem that has come out of this, another thing that these studios have had the audacity to do, guys, on top of everything else, is they have allegedly been paying writers the bare minimum that they can get away with, regardless of the writer's experience. And this is a huge problem, because essentially you're getting rid of a huge motivator for a writer to build up experience in the first place. Because many of us, you know, if you're in a particular field and you have greater experience in that field, you would expect to be compensated more because of your expertise, because of the experience and knowledge that you bring to the table. But the fact that that seems to not be the case in many studios these days is really, really shocking and really problematic for the future of this industry. Because if you're not cultivating good quality, experienced writers in this industry who will eventually become showrunners and, you know, major producers, then where do you think this is going to go? Like, how do you think we are going to be able to continue producing excellent quality content with subpar writers? Like, what is the plan, Hollywood? There is clearly no long-term planning in sight here. And not only are they failing to think of the next generation of experienced writers and showrunners and producers, but they're also failing to support the current generation of excellent writers by lacking any incentive for them to continue in this industry. And so you might even see a huge exodus of amazing talent, you know, from Hollywood because of these poor incentives and this poor pay. And so with all of these reasons in mind, I think this is a pretty good explanation for why we find ourselves in the position that we're in today with the WGA striking. And it was an overwhelming majority that voted to strike, and it was like 98% that decided, F it, we are going to strike. These writers decided to willfully, you know, go without revenue for the next couple of months at least, just to put their point across and just to fight for their rights as employees. And I am completely in support of them, obviously. Just hearing about this cocktail of disaster that the streaming era has created for these writers is of course enough incentive for me to really feel for them and empathize with them. So now that we have established why the WGA have decided to go on strike, now let's quickly talk about the demands that they have for this strike, you know, what they actually want out of it. Now keep in mind, before any union or any members of that union decide to go on strike, there are several measures that are taken in order to prevent the members from having to go down this, you know, measure of last resort. So the strike is something that everyone wants to avoid because it means, you know, not working, and it means not getting any income for that duration of the strike. So there were several steps taken in order to prevent this from happening, but unfortunately the negotiations fell through. Not only did the negotiations fall through, but it seemed like the other side, the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers, didn't really even entertain the demands of the WGA. They didn't really take them seriously because these negotiations are supposed to last for quite a while, some days even, and apparently the talks only lasted for about 4 hours. So like, that's not a good sign. That's not a good sign, guys, okay? Like, we really weren't discussing much, okay? It was kind of an open shut case. So strike they did, and these are the demands that they're asking for. So first of all, predictably, the WGA is asking for increased pay for its writers. As I mentioned before, the average salaries have actually decreased by 4% in the last decade or so, which is shocking because, as I mentioned, studios have been getting an increase in profits over the last few years. So that increase in profits should be reflected in people's salaries, but unfortunately it's not been, and they need to figure that out immediately. And a lot of these pay problems are coming from the fact that, as I mentioned, studios are electing to pay these writers the bare minimum. For instance, according to WGA, 10 years ago 33% of TV writers were paid the minimum rate, but now it seems that 49% of TV writers are paid the minimum rate. So that is a huge increase in people being paid the bare minimum that is agreed upon per, you know, the union's rules. That's crazy. This means that a lot of people aren't even making minimum wage off of writing jobs anymore, and so they have to have other jobs to supplement their income, which is crazy because, like I said, you know, being a TV writer used to be a pretty lucrative job, especially if you could get on those, you know, long TV shows. Another key issue within the WGA's demands is surrounding residuals. You know, this is something that I talked about in my previous video on how studios are doing all that they can to avoid having to pay these creatives their owed residuals, but the WGA is demanding an increase in residuals in total because they've also gone down because of streaming and because of the lack of transparency surrounding streaming numbers. It's tough to advocate for an increase in residuals or even an increase in upfront pay when you don't know the quote value of your work. And again, this goes back to that contrast between, you know, traditional media and new media under streaming, because with traditional media you had things like ratings, you had things like individual DVD sales or you know, Blu-ray sales, and that's how you could would account for the, value of each unit of your work. Whereas now people aren't really paying for specific TV shows or films anymore. They're paying for the platform, they're paying for the streaming service. And so people will pay for that £10 a month for access to hundreds of titles. And so it becomes really difficult to argue your case as a creative for why you're owed an increase in revenue. Another demand from the WGA was the staffing requirements. They want a review of the staffing requirements, especially because of these mini rooms that we talked about. As I said, the studios have been cutting corners in all different ways, and they found ways to circumvent the union's rules regarding, work conditions for their writers. And so the union wants to revisit those rules and really tighten them up to ensure that writers are protected. For instance, writers can't be overworked from these mini rooms, because if you're giving writers, the same amount of work with fewer writers on the project, then that means each individual person is getting a ton more work to do in comparison to the traditional TV setup. Another demand from the WGA has been shorter exclusivity deals. So exclusivity deals basically were made to ensure that writers would only be working on a particular project at a certain period of time. And the WGA wants to revise this in light of the prominence of streaming, because, it's not like back in the day when writers were working on 22 to 24 episode shows. At that point, it made sense that they would be needed and they would have an exclusivity deal covering the entire season of the year. So that would go from September, October to May, June. But nowadays, if you're working on a streaming show that's only 8 to 12 episodes long, it doesn't make sense to have the writers be retained for months upon months before and after the show is wrapped. So, having these shorter exclusivity deals means that they can, just contractually, they're allowed to go off and seek other work once the shows are done. And finally, this is a very interesting sticking point, but another demand that the WGA has is they want some assurances on AI. Now, AI has been a very hot topic at the moment amongst the creative community at large, not just with writers, but with artists as well, from all different mediums. So AI is something that I expect to pop up a lot in, future strike discourse or just discourse in general. But as it pertains to the WGA, they want reassurances that studios are not going to be using AI in lieu of actual people in order to produce scripts or to even finesse scripts. The WGA wants to protect its members from a situation where writers are employed for an even shorter period of time to do like a treatment, to do a rough skeleton of a script. I don't know the proper terminology because I'm not a writer myself, but just to do like a rough little skeleton before it gets sort of plumped up by an AI sort of software, right? Like they don't want that situation because it would mean even less revenue for the writer because they would be seen as having done less work, and it would create a worse situation for the industry at large. So they want to start to tackle this issue already, and I think that's very prudent of them. But I don't know if this specific strike will be the thing that really gets clarity on Hollywood's future use of AI, because there are all different problems from all different sides. I mean, it's a problem for actors, okay? It's a problem for producers, it's a problem for writers. Like, this is a really big deal, a really big issue that I think really needs to be conquered from all different sides. And like I said, from the WGA's perspective, I think it makes sense for them to include it in their demands now, especially because there is a very real risk of these studios turning to AI to produce scripts, especially whilst the writers are on strike. And that would be a disaster, because the whole point of a strike is to create inconvenience so that you get what you want because you are not working at that moment. But if studios are turning to, you know, existing scripts that they may already have and getting the AI to kind of amp things up, or even just creating brand new scripts using AI technology, I think that could turn into a really big issue for these writers and, like I said, for the industry overall. You could see why it would be an attractive option for the studios, because all of these issues of residuals and syndication and all of that would be out of the window. All you would need to do is pay for the AI technology and you would be able to theoretically get a bunch of you know, creative content from that. But the thing about AI is that it doesn't create something out of nothing. It uses existing content, existing material in order to generate something new. And right now the new stuff is rough. Okay, first of all, right now the new stuff is rough as hell. That's beside the point for now. Okay, but let's just say the stuff right now is looking a bit booky, is looking a bit messy. Okay, AI is not the solution that the studios want it to be right now, but still there's a problem of, you know, credits, because if this AI is using existing scripts in order to create or generate new ones, then should the writers of those scripts be credited at all? Should they not get any revenue or residuals from that new work that the AI came up with because of their existing script? It's a very dicey issue, and as I said, I anticipate this being a problem that Hollywood faces for the next few years. But in the meantime, I think we can expect this strike to go on for quite a while, at least a few months. I think the longest strike that the WGA ever had was in the 1980s, and that was about 5 months. The most recent strike before this was, I think, 3 months, and we already saw the impact of that one. Everyone knows about Quantum of Solace, okay? And Daniel Craig, a man of many talents, but writing is not one of them. He wrote that film on set and it was a bit abysmal, okay? So we all know that story, and we all know the impact that even 3 months of strikes can have on Hollywood. But like I said, that was before AI, you know, that was before the dawn of technology that we have today. So we shall see how it impacts these studios. Already studios have come out with strike-proof programming with a heavy emphasis on reality TV and non-scripted shows, which is crazy because David Zaslav was putting a lot of emphasis on non-scripted shows last year, and we were all laughing at him. But maybe this guy is a psychic. Maybe he foresaw what was to come. Maybe he saw the writing on the wall and was like, let's stick to these non-scripted shows. But yeah, these studios have been parading their strike-proof programming over the last couple of weeks, but I suspect we're going to start feeling the pinch, the real pinch, in a few months' time. I don't think it's just going to affect the stuff that's coming out in the next few months, but I think within 6 months to a year from now, we will see the impact of the writers' strike, especially because a lot of the shows that have, you know, stopped production, like Andor season 2, Daredevil, you know, these are shows that were due to come out next year or the year after that, and so that's where we'll see the impact. But for now, I think the best that we can do if we, you know, want to support the WGA is, first of all, you can donate to their fund. I think they have a fund somewhere. I'll put a link down below. But also, let's just chill on the complaints. You know, let's just chill. Okay, the very least that we can do is just not complain that our shows are delayed, even if it is our favorite shows, and that I think we have bigger fish to fry here. They're dealing with a very serious issue, and if the worst that, you know, we have to experience is some of our, you know, favorite shows being delayed by a few months, then I think we can deal with that, guys. Come on, I think we can deal with that, especially because we have too much content available anyway. So like, it's fine. Let's just catch up on what's been going on for the last few years whilst Hollywood sorts itself out. So that's it from me, guys. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on the WGA strike, it's time for you guys to let me know what you think of this whole situation down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.